Good morning, everyone. Any questions from what we discussed yesterday? Hello, am I audible? Hello.
Yes, you are.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. Any questions from what we discussed yesterday? Okay. In case no, so yesterday we were discussing private equity. Just give me a second. Yes, Sanjeev. No, ask anything? Sorry, this is FAP 20 or 18?
20, sir.
ठीक है, तो कुछ नहीं पूछना जो कल किया था. ठीक है, so yesterday we discussed this concept of limited partner and general partners. We also discussed about the PE fund. Yeah. Now, who all invest into PE funds? So these are pension funds, endowments, foundations. So pension funds, आपको पता ही है. So especially in government companies, once the employee retire, the employee continues to get pension for a defined period of time. Now, how does these pension fund work? So for example, when if you're working within government company, so during your tenure or during your working with them on a monthly basis, they deduct some portion of salary and they contribute more towards that. And that gets invested because if an employer is making those additions, let's say for 30, 40 years, because the retirement span is around 50, 55, 60, depending upon which jurisdiction and which category we are looking at. So for which means for 50 years, 40 years, this amount is ideal, and you need to invest. So this is a long tenure, 40 years, and you will not need these funds in most of the time before that. So most of these funds have a lot of surplus, a lot of investable capital, and that's the reason these pension funds go and invest into these PE funds, because they will not need it for 30, 40 years. Similarly, endowment policies आपको पता ही है, insurance में category of policies होती है. You continue to pay premium and you will get your investment back at the end of 30 years, at the end of 40 years. वो endowment policies होती है. So उनके पास again, so in principally what we're trying to do, जो investors हैं, ये वो category of investors हैं, which will have large amount of money and for a longer period of time. यही एक कल हम discuss कर रहे हैं. That's what the difference between hedge fund, sorry, difference between mutual fund and PE fund. Mutual fund generally, those kind of investors will go where the investable amount is very small, and they can't hold the money for a very long period of time. When we say long period of time, we're not looking at 1 year, 2 years, we're looking at 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. So ये सब वही category है, endowments, pension funds, banks, companies, your HNIs, HNIs, your high net worth individuals, insurance companies, again similar जो हमने ऊपर discuss किया, investment banks, corporate. We don't do too much of aggressive investment in this. ज़्यादा नहीं करते हैं, but still it's allowed to us, and other corporates and any other investors. So any doubt on this left side on the category of the investors who can invest into PE funds? Any doubt in this? Okay, so they invest into the PE
bank holding companies.
Banks holding companies जो banks हो गए ना, so let's do अगर आपका बैंक है, वो बैंक को इन्वेस्ट करना है, so इसको हटा देते हैं अगर सिंपल रखना है तो कॉर्पोरेट्स लेते हैं. So corporates में banks भी आ गए, उनकी holding companies भी आ गई. So rather than confusing this, any corporate, so suppose Tata Motors है, Reliance है, and they believe उनके पास surplus funds and they have a risk appetite, और वो अपने शेयर होल्डर्स को कन्विंस कर पाते हैं कि हमें पीई फंड में इन्वेस्ट करना चाहिए, तो कर सकते हैं ना, कोई रिस्ट्रिक्शन नहीं है उनके ऊपर. बट आई एम टेलिंग यू प्रैक्टिकल वर्ल्ड में नहीं होता. वी डोंट सी टू मच of investments flowing in from these corporates or banks in a practical world, because try and understand, if Reliance has surplus fund, Reliance ने अपने शेयर होल्डर से जो पैसा लिया है वो किसी पर्पस के लिए लिया है, and the purpose is for that business, not for investing the PE fund. ठीक है? So though the regulation and the law allows, they can invest, and they generally invest very small amount, okay, just to keep some diversification in their entire portfolio. But we don't see too much of churning and attraction from corporates and banks into this category, because generally उनका board और उनके shareholders generally ये approve नहीं करते हैं, because the thought process is, if suppose you are into Reliance, or let's say Reliance Jio, if Reliance Jio has raised money for the telecom business, why are you moving from a telecom business and going into PE funds? ठीक है, so ये थोड़ा सा एक प्रिंसिपल डिफरेंस रहता है. बट हैविंग सेड दिस, कॉर्पोरेट्स को अलाउड होता है यहाँ पे इन्वेस्ट करना. Any other doubt, Deepak, on this?
Didn't get you. Can you please repeat once again on this part?
So bank holding company means corporates. So corporates like ICICI Bank or Tata Motors, any corporate is also allowed to invest their surplus funds, if any, into the PE funds. But generally प्रैक्टिकल पर्सपेक्टिव से इतना इन्वेस्टमेंट वो करते नहीं है, बिकॉज उनके पास इतना सरप्लस फंड ही नहीं होता है, और वो सरप्लस फंड अगर होता भी है, दे जनरली ट्राई एंड यूज फॉर देयर ओन बिजनेस रादर देन गिविंग टू समबडी एल्स.
Okay, understood.
So these type of investors gives money to PE fund. PEF को PF PE funds है, and then PE funds invest into these segments. ठीक है. Now they can give seed financing, they can give startup financing. Seed financing, startup financing is pretty similar. ठीक है. the small difference could be seed financing. Startup phase थोड़ा सा पहले आता है. So seed financing is more at the idea phase. So if let's assume I am a PE fund and let's assume one of you comes to me that with an idea that I have this idea, but I'm yet to develop a product to meet that idea. You want to do that research, something like this. So if I start funding you at that stage, that's called as seed funding. Case two, let's assume you have thought through an idea and you've developed a product, and now but you want to start that product, the production of the product, the rollout of the product. And if I start funding you that stage, that called as startup financing. Scenario three, which is expansion. Expansion is, let's assume you rolled out a product, you hit the market is has accepted your product, and you're getting more demand, but you don't have production facility to increase the production, and you want to set up more machinery, more plants to meet the increased demand. And if I start funding you at that stage, that becomes an expansion capital. Fourth is a replace. Any doubt in first three? Fourth is a replacement capital.
एक्सपेंशन दोबारा एक बार बता दीजिए.
Sorry.
Expansion. Please repeat.
I've set up a business and the business has grown up, and you want to expand your business, and for expansion you don't have funds, and you come to me. I'm a PE fund and you come to me for asking funds, and you're asking money to expand your production facility. And if I give you funds at that stage, which will help you to expand your business, that's an expansion funding.
Okay.
I think simple, eh? The fund which is given at the start of that business. When I say start, not the rollout of the product, the start of the developing idea. That's called a seed financing. The funding given to start the rollout of the product, that's a startup funding. The funding given to help the company to expand the business, because the business has already developed and is into the need of the expansion. That's called expansion finance. Replacement capital. So suppose you have a company, so suppose ABC Limited, और उसमें A owner है और X एक private equity है. So X has invested into ABC Limited, and X is a PE firm. Okay, is a private investor. Now after 5 years, X goes out and Y comes in. So which means ये जो पैसा है, the money that Y will bring in is only to replace the capital of the X. This money is not going to benefit ABC Limited, because उसकी ABC Limited के expansion के लिए use नहीं होने वाला. It's just replacing the existing capital. It's just one owner is moving out or one investor is moving out, and of course when the investor will move out, he will take his money back, because I still need to fund that replacement. And that's called as replacement capital. You're replacing the existing investor.
Sir, can you repeat the scenario?
You're replacing the existing investor. Suppose X is an investor into the company ABC, and Y is replacing that investor. So that becomes a replacement capital.
So here Y is replacing X.
Yeah. And the capital that Y will bring to replace the X capital is called as replacement capital.
Okay.
Then suppose if the company is buying out some other company or is buying out a stake in another company and you're funding that, that's called as buyout capital. And the last is special situation. So anything other than this, what's mentioned is a standard list. If you're taking funds for anything which can't be defined or which can't be categorized into any of these above categories, that just falls into this category of special situation. So you've done this. You've done this. Now,
Nishant, I have a question.
yeah, Parag.
Will these investors be part of board of directors or they are just doing it from the outside, the individual investors?
Which
Like in
investors?
case of buyouts,
Which investors?
the HNI investors, or unlike if there is not any company who is funding,
See,
but there are
HNI,
individuals who are
HNI,
funding.
HNI investor is not giving money directly to this company. They're not.
Okay.
All these are giving funding to PE fund, and the PE fund in turn is getting is investing into these companies. It's like a mutual fund. So suppose you go and give money to mutual fund, and mutual fund then goes and invests into Reliance. For Reliance, you are not the investor. The mutual fund is the owner or the investor.
Okay, so there is no question of decision making powers and anything else.
Yes. Yes. The decision making is anyways no. I'm saying even in the books of this company, the name of these investors will not appear. It will not appear. These when this PE fund will invest into these companies, the name of this PE fund will come in as an investor, not the name of these underlying investors, who is in turn backing up these investments.
Okay, got it.
This QIP will also be covered in this phase.
Any questions on this slide? Then there's another concept on this slide, which is fund of fund. Now, so suppose if you're investing, so there are two models that is possible. So suppose you're A and this is fund, and let's say this is markets. So this is fund 1 and this is fund 2. So what we discussed so far is this model, that this investor invests into this fund, and then this fund invests into some companies or markets. Okay. Now, what do you mean by fund of fund? Let me get a different marker for that. So fund of fund means this investor puts money into this fund, and this fund puts in turn money to this fund, and then this fund puts money into this market. So the flow which is being plotted in red, that's called as fund of fund. So in that case, this fund is called as fund of fund because this fund is not investing directly into market, or directly invest nahi kar raha hai. So that fund, once it gets money from the investor, in turn invests money to some other fund, and that another fund directly goes and invests. So that's called as fund of fund. So that's also possible in PE firms, and that's what is mentioned in this slide. So So these investors can invest into fund, and the fund can invest into this company. That's one possibility. Second possibility, these can invest into fund of fund, and then fund of fund in turn can invest into these other funds, and this other fund in turn can invest into markets. So both scenarios are possible. Okay. Third scenario is these investors can directly invest into these companies. So ये legally allowed है, but बहुत कम होता है. These are the three sources or three channels through which these PE investments are possible. Anji, any doubt on this slide?
से फंड ऑफ फंड इन्वेस्टमेंट से बेनिफिट क्या होता है?
The benefits are, suppose if in this example, let's assume two, fund two's minimum investment size is $20 million. अब ये A investors के पास $20 million नहीं है, तो क्या करेगा वो? उसके पास तो नहीं जा सकता ना डायरेक्टली. बट ऐसे बहुत सारे और इन्वेस्टर्स होंगे जिनके पास 1 मिलियन से इंडिविजुअली को, वो सब जाके इस फंड को दे देते हैं, और इस फंड का मिनिमम इन्वेस्टमेंट साइज 1 मिलियन है, तो वो कोलेट करके एक साथ यहाँ डाल देता है.
ओके.
Anything else?
I'd ask the question on this QIP.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Qualified institutional placements they are also being covered in this private equity placements and all.
नहीं, QIP बहुत अलग चीज होती है. So QIPs are qualified institutional players or buyers.
No, actually, just out of my curiosity, I just read yesterday in the paper that HDFC is going to do that.
Correct. So QIBs, what they do, they are not only limited to the investment into unlisted companies. They are also very aggressive into the investment into listed companies. So वो दोनों तरफ खेलते हैं. If they want to invest into unlisted company, they can do that. If they want to invest into listed company, they can do that also. ये theoretical version हो गया दीपक. In a practical scenario, when we handle these portfolios, what I have seen in last 15 odd years is these QIBs are strategically more aggressive towards the listed companies, because it allows them easily to evaluate what is the value of the market. So the problem is between a listed company and unlisted company, you need to understand this fundamentally. If I today go and invest, for example, let's take an example of Hematicus. Suppose Deepak, you are one of those QIBs, or let's do FII, uh, uh, or a kind of a hedge fund also. Let's take that also. So you're a big investor, depending upon which category you belong, but your law the jurisdiction to which you belong allows you to invest across the asset classes. Okay? Because in some of the countries, in some of the jurisdictions, that's also a restriction. But let's assume that's not a restriction. So now let's assume you want to invest. So आपके पास दो options हैं. you can invest into unlisted company. Let's say Marticus is that example. Okay, and you can invest into listed company. Let's take uh, uh, let's take Reliance. Okay, now when you invest, and let's not go to the underlying business. Let's assume both these companies are good investment companies, same business. Let's assume that for the sake of this discussion. Now for you, अगर आप Imaticus या किसी unlisted company में invest करते हो, the problem with you is you will not be able to track the value of the share, or the valuation of the company, or the value of the share, or the performance of this company on a very transparent and in a periodic basis. आपके पास benchmark इतने आसानी से नहीं मिलेगा because इसका price stock exchange पे तो होगा नहीं. So how would you know कि company performance ऊपर जा रहा है नीचे जा रहा है? Okay. Whereas if you invest into Reliance or any listed company on a periodic basis, you can compare the performance in terms of where the stock price is heading up. So if you're a kind of an investor who fundamentally belong to that school of thought, who is driven more aggressively by the stock price movement, though the regulation or the law of your country might allow you to invest into unlisted company, you will try and be little away from an unlisted company, is more aggressive towards the listed company. But if you're a kind of that investor who's fundamentally looking at the P&L of the company rather than looking at the share price of the company, these are those kind of an investor who becomes attractive towards the unlisted companies. And PE funds are those kind of companies who generally becomes attracted towards rather than looking at the share price. तो ये बहुत एक difference होता है fundamentally ये दो companies के investments, दो segments के investments, right? And QIBs and FIS are generally they are, I'm not saying all, but generally out of, so suppose if I've interacted with 10, generally out of 10, those 7 and 6 or 8 probably would be more attracted towards that first school of thought, looking at the share price patterns and stuff like that. So ये थोड़ा सा practical difference होता है. Having said this, theoretically they are allowed to invest into PE funds as well, or directly in unlisted company as well. Did कुछ पूछना है और? Is it good enough?
Yes, means what they are saying that they want to go to QIP. They can also go to that FIA process, that fundraising through a new sort of introduction of new equities and all that. What is the advantage of going to this QIP with the other one, issuing in public equity? Or it's a time saving on means basic difference why they want to go with this QIP and not going with issuing a public equity and all that.
You're referring this to any specific case, or you're referring it to the general scenario? How do you want to respond to this?
No, you can make it a specific, because on I was just reading on the HDFC case that why they are not going in for this raising a fund from public equity.
So देखो जो scenario market में चल रहा है ना, अभी public equity is not one of the good options. Okay, so I'm aware of this transaction. In fact, we if you look at the current scenario, and especially in next couple of other quarters as well, it will not be very good for a company like HDFC Bank to come out in the public equity into public offering segment and start raising funds. There are a couple of reasons to this. One, most of the companies currently on stock exchange has seen significant crash in the value of their share price. Okay, so अगर आप most of the companies अगर आप pick करोगे pre-COVID, so you're looking at somewhere at the end of December last year or Jan 20. I'm talking about Indian incorporated entities, not the companies which are incorporated outside India and also listed into Indian stock exchange, because वहाँ बहुत different scenarios हैं. But we're looking at some of the companies like SDFC, which originates from India. Okay, so ये कंपनीज के जैन फेब से पहले की स्टॉक प्राइस और अब की स्टॉक प्राइस में अगर आप देखोगे सिग्निफिकेंट has come down, but that's not a fundamental decrease in the value. That's more as a market sentiment because what's happening. So my view is, and most of the economists also believe the same thing, that this dip in the stock price or the fall in the value is seems to be more temporary. When I say temporary, I'm not referring to 1 day, 2 day. I'm referring to this COVID or pandemic scenario. So in next 1.5 years, or probably 2 years, depending upon the way our government is looking at it. Once we are able to eradicate this, once we are able to completely eradicate the impact of this, especially from economic perspective, even not from a medical perspective, uh, then the share price will fundamentally show its real worth. Correct. So अभी अगर मैं पब्लिक ऑफर लेके आता हूँ तो मुझे पब्लिक को ये कन्विंस करना प्रैक्टिकली डिफिकल्ट है कि मेरा शेयर प्राइस 100 रुपए ट्रेड हो रहा है मार्केट में अभी, but my still I mean the management of the SDFC believes that it is 150 rupees. So आप मुझे 150 के हिसाब से प्राइस दे दो, मनी दे दो, rather than giving me 100 rupees. It's practically very difficult, almost impossible to convince these retail investors. ठीक है, but it's possible for me to convince a selected sophisticated
Yes, yes. Okay,
because
it's all market scenario is the main cause of this, basically.
yeah, sentiment. Yeah, and if you see, not only SDFC, a lot of other companies are following the same route. You will not see too much of attraction from a public offer markets in the current scenario, and will continue for next couple of quarters. That's my view.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on this slide?
You have given one examples on funds that there is a the second fund is the portfolio level should be 20 million, and you don't have that, and you are going to some other institution and syndicating that investment sort of thing to go to the second one. There is a channel. Is it only the value of the portfolio, or it's in risk aversion is also included in that for an small investor, or like a person
Theoretically,
having?
sorry, go ahead.
Yes, no, my question is over.
Yeah, so theoretically, yes. The way this this fund A, sorry, not fund A, fund one, the way this fund one is try to market to these investors is, yes, so their marketing strategy or their RMs when trying to speak and convince these investors, we are fund of fund and you invest money into us and we will then invest into other fund. They one of the uh, one of the marketing pointers or advantages is contains this risk aversion piece as well. But practically it doesn't help too much, because what you're trying to convince to these investors, you will diversify your portfolio, but practically you are, suppose if this customer A or this investor A has an appetite to invest into this fund, whether it goes through this or whether it goes directly, it doesn't make too much of difference, because at the end you're taking risk on this fund two, not fund one. In fact, if you're going through fund one, you're taking more risk, because now what is possible, so you're exposed to two funds, fund A and fund B, fund one and fund two. So practically I don't see too much of advantage from a risk aversion perspective, because it doesn't solve too much, because at the end the decision maker is sitting on fund two. which means you're taking risk to the capability of the fund manager 2 along with the fund manager 1. The other scenario where generally it is useful is the investor A has so much of confidence on fund manager 1 and does not know anything about these funds 2, 3, 4, and says, okay, I will give you funds and you play what you want to do. I trust you, or I have a comfort with you, or in the past I have made money, then I have given money to you. So then because this investor A does not know too much about these funds, the investor A goes and leaves the money to fund 1 and leaves it fund manager 1 to decide where he or she wants to invest. So risk aversion theoretically होता है, इतना ज़्यादा practically कुछ ज़्यादा खास effect नहीं पड़ता है.
Yeah, because if we are going from this fund, if somebody investor A goes to fund 1 and after that in turn it will go to fund 2, the transactional costs and all that are
It's expensive.
there.
Yeah, of
Yes.
course. It's an expensive setup, but आप कुछ कर नहीं सकते ना. या तो आप suppose आपके पास time है and resources है तो करो research इसके बारे में fund 2 के बारे में. But आपके पास time ही नहीं है. नहीं, why only this? Let's assume the entire fund management business is based on this concept. So let's assume this fund 2 now goes and invests into company X. Company investor A can directly go and invest in company X ना, ये सब cost बता सकता है ना, और उसके पास उतना time नहीं है या उसके पास इतनी money नहीं है, इसलिए तो ये invest हो जा रहा है ना. So yes, it will be expensive setup because fund manager 1 and fund manager 2 both will deduct their fees, expenses and other expenses. So you as an investor need to take a call. Do you want to pay this cost or you don't want to save this cost? So in the process of you, in case you want to save this cost, you need to put your time, your decision making, your resources at probably you need to consume those to get to the investment.
Okay, understood.
Is there anything else on this slide? Let me clean this up. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. That's
Sir,
right.
can you give me again repeat about the hedge fund because I today late login.
Hedge fund अभी discuss नहीं किया हमने.
Okay.
So we've discussed this. Now let's discuss venture capital.
So I have a question.
Yeah, right.
It's more like a confusion between private equity and PE funds.
बोलो.
प्राइवेट इक्विटी में जो कंपनी मतलब पैसा लेना चाहती है वो डिसाइड कर सकती है कौन सा इन्वेस्टर इन्वेस्ट करेगा, बट पीई फंड्स में मुझे ऐसा कुछ दिखा नहीं कि कंपनी के पास ऐसा राइट है या ऐसा ऑप्शन है जहाँ पे वो डिसाइड कर सके.
नहीं
तो
समझा
इनमें
आपका
कोई
क्वेश्चन.
डिफरेंस है.
I didn't understand your question.
For example, a company goes to a private investor and then he has an option to decide between 2 or 3 investors whose money that company wants, right? And in this PE fund, I actually didn't see this option with that company. उसमें तो बस इंटरमीडिएरी के पास गई, उनके पास जिसका पैसा पड़ा था उन्होंने इन्वेस्ट करवा दिया. तो ये
But ऐसे
कोई
नहीं होता है ना, ऐसे नहीं होता है. So suppose if the company X decides to go to investor A and this is a private placement, and if A agrees to the terms and condition of X, why would X reject that proposal? Because X is the one who approached who invested A.
Okay.
I understand if they're not able to agree to some terms and condition, if they're not able to agree on some valuation or something like this, then I understand, which in turn means A is no more in the race. But the scenario that you gave, that A is also available, B is available, and C is also available, then company X is trying to choose between A, B, and see, why would that happen? इनफैक्ट कंपनी एक्स ने ए को अप्रोच किया, ए के मना करने के बाद ही या ए के साथ डील नहीं होने पे ही दे विल अप्रोच बी, एंड देन इन टर्न दे विल अप्रोच सी.
Okay.
हेलो
यस सुभाष.
सर, क्या जो पीई प्राइवेट इक्विटी है, totally guidance by the RBI and anything else? Who's my question is, इसको कौन ऑपरेट करता है या किसकी गाइडेंस से?
सेबी. आरबीआई को लेना देना नहीं.
ओके.
आरबीआई इज नॉट द रेगुलेटर फॉर पी फंड्स.
ओके, तो ये सारी क्या सेबी के रूल्स रेगुलेशन फॉलो करना पड़ेगा?
Yeah. So RBI will only come into picture from a money laundering and stuffs like those. So if suppose, and वो PE fund के लिए नहीं है, वो तो किसी भी company के लिए. So if you're trying to launder funds from a taxation perspective, we're trying to convert black to white because a lot of PE funds specialize and do that. वो सब के लिए RBI आएगा. But apart from these, the primary regulator or primary these PE fund needs to be governed by the rules or the regulation from SEBI.
सर, इसका भी तो कैलकुलेशन का फॉर्मूला होगा ना?
कौन सी कैलकुलेशन?
कैलकुलेशन मींस इसका जो फंड वगैरह रेज करते हैं तो उसका भी तो कुछ रेशियो होगा या कुछ कैलकुलेशन तो निकालने का तरीका होगा ना?
कौन सा कैलकुलेशन? आई डोंट अंडरस्टैंड द क्वेश्चन.
जैसे प्राइवेट इक्विटी है, लाइक शेयर की बात कर रहा हूँ, शेयर या इक्विटीज वगैरह का, तो उसका भी तो एक कैलकुलेशन होता है ना अपना. प्रैक्टिकली
किस चीज का कैलकुलेशन? मुझे नहीं समझ आ रहा है. आप किस चीज की कैलकुलेशन की बात कर रहे हैं?
सर नहीं, कुछ और क्वेश्चन.
सॉरी.
नहीं, थैंक यू सर.
The question is resolved.
Resolved, sir.
Answer one more thing. In case of replacement and buyouts, ये PE फर्म का डिसीजन होगा ना कि कौन इन्वेस्ट करेगा या इसमें भी कंपनी का डिसीजन रहते हैं?
डिसीजन तो कंपनी के बोर्ड का ही रहेगा ना. PE फंड का डिसीजन क्यों रहेगा?
नहीं, रिप्लेसमेंट, अब इन्वेस्टर अगर जाना चाहता है, अपना पैसा निकालना चाहता है और वो किसी दूसरे इन्वेस्टर के पास अप्रोच करता है, तो ये उन दोनों पार्टीज का आपस का डिसीजन है या फिर कंपनी भी इसमें इन्वॉल्व होगी?
डिपेंड करता है. इफ अगर ओरिजिनल इन्वेस्टर जब आया था उसके टर्म्स एंड कंडीशन में कि यू नीड टू टेक अप्रूवल फ्रॉम द बोर्ड या कोई लॉक इन पीरियड है 5 साल का, उस पर डिपेंड करता है. अगर टर्म्स एंड कंडीशन बोलते हैं यू आर फ्रीली अलाउड टू डू व्हाटएवर यू वांट टू डू, सो कोई रिस्ट्रिक्शन, कोई बोर्ड का कोई से नहीं है. बट अगर उसमें बोलते हैं कि नहीं आपको 5 साल का लॉक इन है और आप उस लॉक इन से पहले बेचना चाहते हो, तो आपको बोर्ड का अप्रूवल लेना पड़ेगा टू वेव दोस रिस्ट्रिक्शन.
ओके.
Now, what is venture capital funds? So, venture capital funds means so venture capital का मतलब क्या है? So let's break this into two parts: capital and venture. So venture means you're starting some some new setup, some new business. That's called as venture. Okay. And capital, we all know, is funds. So any fund which is invested into these new startups or into new business or new venture, that's called as venture capital. Now, when these unlisted companies start the business at a very initial phase, and they are very, very small, they're yet to prove their success, they're yet to experience or yet to test whether the product or the idea is accepted by the market or not. At that stage, they carry an additional risk, correct? Because it is possible the product itself might not get even accepted, or the idea might not even get accepted by the market. So those unlisted companies or those startup businesses carries an additional risk. Sometimes what happens, these PE firms might not have that additional risk appetite to invest for that much higher risk key asset classes, or for such high risky companies. And these venture capital firms or VC firms comes in where they try and where they invest into such companies which are at a very, very initial phase and are carrying a risk more than the other unlisted companies. And that's why these VC firms, these VC firms is a sub-segment of the private equity firms. So every VC will be private equity, but every private equity might not, every PE firm will not work like a VC firm. So venture capital firms operate into a niche segment, and this niche segment is about those companies who are not able to easily get funds from other private placement segments, because they're carrying an additional risk. And the additional risk that we're talking about, the idea is new, it's completely new technology, it's completely new segment, nobody is willing to take that risk, and this venture capital comes and starts investing for that initial phase. Any doubt in venture capital? Okay, so that's the reason the PE firms, the private equity investment, will have these different avatars or different forms. One, it could be venture capital, which is very, very initial phase, which is more from a high risk perspective. Growth capital, we've discussed this. Now this is relatively less risky because your business has been accepted by the market, and buyout is simply what we've discussed. So if you see from a risk perspective, let me put numbers. So there's 1, 2, and 3. The second and third carries a very different risk profile vis-a-vis the first segment, and that's why for the first segment you calling that segment as a venture capital fund. Any question, guys, on this? Okay, so which means we're done with this piece. So now we'll move to this, this slide. So we've discussed venture capital, we discussed private equity, and that's why if you see, venture capital is primarily about the early stage. Okay, जो expansion है later stage इतना ज्यादा aggressive नहीं रहता, because generally यहाँ पे generally aggressive हो जाता है private equity category. ठीक है. Now what is hedge funds? So ठीक है, or what is angel investors? पहले angel investors करते हैं. So angel investors भी वो investors होते हैं जो so what is my angel? Angel means nobody is helping you, nobody is giving you funds in the market for your idea, for your startup, and from somewhere this individual or this financer comes in and gives you funds. So that's why he or she becomes an angel for your business or for your idea. Okay, so these are those investors, these are generally those individual investors who have a very high risk appetite, एंड जिसको कोई आसानी से पैसा नहीं दे रहा है उसमें पैसा लगाने के लिए रेडी हो जाते हैं, एंड दैट्स व्हाई these act as an angel investors. Now you need to understand the difference between venture capital and an angel investor, because दोनों में मैंने यही चीज बोली कि दोनों हाई रिस्क की बिजनेस में पैसा लगाते हैं. The difference is these are angels that are generally individuals, and these venture capitalists are professionally managed company like a fund. तो ये डिफरेंस होता है. There is a difference between angel and the venture capital. Angel investor ने पैसा लगाया और वो प्रमोटर पे छोड़ देता है कि ठीक है मैंने पैसा लगा दिया, तू काम कर. अब वेंचर कैपिटल एक्टिवली इन्वॉल्व हो जाता है, बिकॉज उनके ऊपर पूरी टीम होती है. वो एक्टिवली आपके मैनेजमेंट में इन्वॉल्व रहेगा, आपके डिसीजन मेकिंग में इन्वॉल्व रहेगा, आपके कॉन्टैक्ट्स लेके आएगा, अपने आइडियाज आपको देगा. एंजल इन्वेस्टर इज लाइक इंडिविजुअल इन्वेस्टर. फॉर एग्जाम्पल let's say you go to Virat Kohli and you pitch business idea, and Virat Kohli says I'm happy to take this risk, and says okay, I give you X million dollars. And uske baad he is not bothered too much. He's not bothered in too much, and not in terms of return. He will not participate because he has his own. From a career perspective, he has to put time in his own career rather than sitting with you and discussing your ideas. Correct? He will occasionally get involved with you, and he will put a team where you have to give constant returns or disclosures to him. But he will not get involved with you day-to-day participation or active idea or your marketing strategy. वो सब नहीं करने वाला है वो. ठीक है. But let's assume there's a company ABC Limited which is acting like a proper venture capital firm. वहाँ पे वो actively आपके साथ involve होंगे, and that's the difference between angel investors and venture capitalist firms. These are professionally managed setups. Angel investors are generally driven like an individual investors who have a high appetite and have a high capital to invest. Any doubt in this slide except hedge fund?
Hello.
Yes, Subhash.
So angel capital means ये हो गया ना, total role and responsibility separate हो गया ना फिर angel capital में investment में separate portion हो गया ना, कि जैसे आप according to आपके है कि आप बोल रहे हो कि इसमें angel में ये सारा responsibility और bear individual करेगा.
मैंने नहीं बोला इंडिविजुअल करेगा, मैंने बोला इंडिविजुअल कुछ करता ही नहीं है, उल्टा बोला मैंने.
ओके. अच्छा, इंडिविजुअल नहीं करता है,
वो कर सकता है बट वो जनरली पार्टिसिपेट नहीं करता वो सब चीजों में.
ओके.
यही द क्वेश्चन है.
और सर अगर एंजल इन्वेस्टर एक्टिवली पार्टिसिपेट करे तो एक जो बेसिक डिफरेंस था वो खत्म हो गया, तो इसको वेंचर कैपिटल कहेंगे या फिर नहीं कहेंगे?
अगर एंजल इन्वेस्टर पार्टिसिपेट करेगा तो पार्टिसिपेट करने के लिए उसको अपना टीम पूरा सेटअप बनाना पड़ेगा ना. अपना काम धाम छोड़ के आप ही के बिजनेस में इन्वॉल्व होना पड़ेगा ना.
हाँ, ओके ओके.
तो वो फिर वो एक कंपनी की तरह काम करेगा ना, which means उसका डे टू डे काम यही हो जाएगा, तो वो एक वेंचर कैपिटलिस्ट बन जाएगा.
ओके.
मैं बहुत सिंपल सा एग्जांपल देता हूँ. मान लो मेरे पास एक बिजनेस आइडिया है, मैं आपके पास आया, मैंने कहा इन्वेस्ट कर दो. आपने कहा ठीक है सर मेरे पास पैसा है, आई एम कन्विंस्ड विद योर आइडिया, इन्वेस्ट कर दो. उसके बाद आप सिर्फ मुझसे रिटर्न जब होते हैं और जो पीरियोडिक मीटिंग होती है उसमें आपके साथ मिलता हूँ और आपको रिटर्न्स, आपके जो भी रिटर्न्स आ रहे प्रॉफिट आ रहा है उसका पोर्शन आपको दे देता हूँ. यू सेटिस्फाइड विद दिस? दिस इज एंजल इन्वेस्टर. आप एक फुल फ्लैज कंपनी खोल के बैठ जाते हो और मुझसे रेगुलर मीटिंग करोगे, मेरे बिजनेस में पार्टिसिपेट करोगे, डिसीजन मेकिंग में पार्टिसिपेट करोगे, अपने आइडियाज दोगे, मेरे साथ मार्केटिंग स्ट्रेटेजी में इन्वॉल्व होंगे. आपको मैं कॉन्टैक्ट लेके आता हूँ, मेरे पास ये कॉन्टैक्ट है, इससे बात कर, उससे बात कर. तो वो करने के लिए आपको पूरी मशीनरी सेटअप करनी पड़ेगी ना.
यस सर.
तो वो वेंचर कैपिटल हो गया.
ओके.
इसलिए अगर आप देखोगे दिस इज द कीवर्ड, प्रोफेशनल वेंचर कैपिटल. दे वर्क लाइक अ प्रोफेशनल बॉडी और प्रोफेशनल कंपनी. पूरा सेटअप होता है उनके पास.
ओके सर.
I'm having a confusion, small confusion. Like you said, that these are the subsets of PEF, right? So how
No,
these
no,
can be?
no, no. I didn't say these are the subsets of PEF. I said this is a subset of PE, private equity. The difference between PE and PEF.
Okay. Then how is private equity acting as a separate player
और
in
सबसेट
here?
और सबसेट और सबसेट ये नहीं है. सबसेट ये डिफरेंट फॉर्म्स थे उसके जो हमने बात किया. एंड दिस इसकी प्राइवेट इक्विटी किस किस प्लेयर्स और किस किस कैटेगरी में ऑपरेट करता है. So it's not PEF, it's private equity.
ओके, बट यहाँ पे फिर प्राइवेट इक्विटी अलग से कैसे रोल करता है?
अलग से रोल करता है
मतलब हाउ?
स्लाइड में आपको कंपैरिजन दिखाने की कोशिश करी है कि एंजल में ये सब आ गया, वेंचर कैपिटल में ये आ गया, हेज फंड यहाँ पे आ गया और प्राइवेट इक्विटी ये 2 कैटेगरीज या 3 कैटेगरीज में एक्टिवली पार्टिसिपेट करता है. सो ये पीईएफ है, लेट मी पुट दिस वे, अगर आपको आसान होता है तो. और ये पूरा पीई है.
नहीं, I understood this, but above that, the private equity can invest at all these stages, right?
No, this is not what it says.
No.
This says प्राइवेट इक्विटी किस किस कैटेगरीज के थ्रू पैसा जा सकता है. प्राइवेट इक्विटी इज नॉट एन एंटिटी. प्राइवेट इक्विटी इज अ टाइप ऑफ ए कैपिटल. वो एक इक्विटी कैटेगरी है. प्राइवेट इक्विटी में कहाँ से ले सकता हूँ. अगर लेट्स अज्यूम मैं एक कंपनी और मुझे प्राइवेट इक्विटी चाहिए, तो मैं एक एंजल इन्वेस्टर से ले सकता हूँ, मैं एक वेंचर कैपिटल से ले सकता हूँ, मैं एक पीई फंड से ले सकता हूँ, और एक मैं हेज फंड से ले सकता हूँ. दिस इज द वे यू नीड टू रीड दिस लाइन.
Yeah, that's okay.
Is that clear?
Yes, thank you.
I have one question on this venture capital. When venture capital, you are saying that they have the people who are putting their money in this venture capital, they put a separate setup to monitor the financials and all that. Can we say this? Probably, I mean, a silly question. It may be. It's a joint venture. Can we predict from this as a joint venture?
Hello? Deepak, could you repeat your question? My laptop got hanged.
Actually, I'm just confused on this part. That's venture capital. You're saying that the people who are investing in this and venture capital are putting in a setup to monitor the operational and financial part of that. Is this venture capital is after that we can say this is an given this joint venture development on sort of thing.
नहीं, वेंचर कैपिटल जॉइंट वेंचर कंप्लीटली 2 अलग-अलग कैटेगरी है. जॉइंट
I
वेंचर
want
इज,
to, yes, please.
your
I
question
want
is
to know
what is the
about,
difference?
yes, because in this also they are involved in this financials, and they are putting in the startup to be in the operational and financial know-how of this new company in which they are investing. So what is the thin line difference between that joint venture and venture capital? Because joint venture is they have coming up a similar goal for the time being, and they after that they depart.
But joint venture is two entities coming together for a specific purpose or
Goal,
for a
yes,
specific
yes.
time. Okay?
After that, they depart.
They dissolve. So for them, it is not it is not it is not it is not that they're investing their funds into somebody else's business. They are coming together. So somebody else and somebody is just coming together and they're trying to develop something. Here, venture capital firm is is is
Somebody
investing.
else idea, they are putting the
Yeah,
money.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay, 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 understood.
Okay. Hedge fund. So yesterday we discussed about mutual fund, and then we discussed about private equity fund. Now, hedge fund. So for example, private equity fund हमने कल discuss किया. Private equity fund is a fund which invest into unlisted companies, into private companies, and mutual fund are those companies which generally invest into listed companies. Now, in the hedge fund works very similar to mutual fund. The only difference is hedge fund has a very does not invest into too much of risky asset classes, because from a regulation perspective, from a regulator perspective, this the what regulator has done, regulator has put two types of mutual funds into the segments. They put two different types of mutual funds. One is a mutual fund where retail investors like you and me can go and invest, and these retail investors will have small these are small ticket size transactions. We will invest small amount for a smaller period. Probably because we are retail individual investor, we will not have too much of risk appetite as well. So वो mutual fund उन categories के लिए बना दिया गया है. There would be other category of the investors who have a very high risk appetite, high risk, high investment. They want to invest big amount, high risk appetite. At the same time, they do not. This is important piece. I do not. They do not want to restrict their investment only into private into unlisted companies, and hence they will generally not go to these PE funds because they don't want to restrict their investment to a private equity. They want, okay, let unlisted companies also be in the portfolio and the less listed companies be portfolio, and that's where these investors will go to hedge fund, because hedge fund can go anywhere they want across the globe, and they will take much higher risk appetite from a strategy perspective, from an asset classes perspective, and that's the difference between hedge fund and the mutual fund. So Syed, can you, if you, in case you can, Syed, can you go and mute, please? So that's the difference in mutual fund and the hedge fund. In the broadly difference points are the risk appetite, the categories of the asset classes they play in, the investors from which they raise fund. These are the broadly three categories, and of course, fourth is from a regulation perspective. So regulation gives there is there are very less restrictions and requirements for a hedge fund, because the regulator wants them to be free from restriction perspective, so they can invest into much higher risk asset classes as well. But mutual fund, because the government or the regulator understand this is for retail investors, hence it should not be too risky, because otherwise retail investor ka paisa can go for a toss, and hence they put some restrictions and more restrictions on mutual fund for their operations. Any doubt? Any doubt on this?
Sir, how do we identify that whether an asset class is risky or not? What are the parameters for that?
So the parameters are completely it's a different discussion. So for example, if I today ask you, do you want to invest into so the assessment of the risk is a very individualistic concept. So for example, do you drive?
Yes,
Oh, what bike, car, what category?
both.
मतलब बहुत ज्यादा रेगुलरली क्या ड्राइव करते हो?
ज़्यादा regularly bike.
बाइक. So let's take an example of this. So आप बाइक ड्राइव करते हो, मैं बाइक ड्राइव करता हूँ, ठीक है? And let's assume it's a Sunday early morning, ठीक है? So Sunday early morning, थोड़ा normal working day है, and you're going from your office to, so you're going from your home to office, and अभी pandemic वगैरह हटा दो, no work from home or restrictions, वो सब हटा के normal बात करते हैं. At what speed you will drive your bike?
So 50-60.
Sorry?
50 to 60 kilometers per hour.
क्यों उसके ऊपर क्यों नहीं? बट आपकी बाइक में तो ज्यादा स्पीड होगी ना, उसके ऊपर क्यों नहीं?
Personal choice, sir.
So see, वो रिस्की है. You don't realize this, वो रिस्की है. Because you know, if you drive at a higher speed, you will get a return. What is a return? The return is you will save time, correct? You will reach early
Yeah.
to that point. But you know the risk is if something if somebody comes in between or something happens, then you know you're running a risk of the injury or probably something more than that as well. So there's a risk and reward concept, correct? And that's an individual choice. Whereas you, while driving, you might see somebody else on the road who might be driving at 100 kilometers per hour. होता है ना ऐसे?
Right. Right.
So that's and exactly. दोनों बाइक चला रहे हैं, दोनों सेम प्लेटिनम पल्सर 150cc बाइक चला रहे हैं. So it's not about the capacity of the engine. It's same capacity that you are driving. Both same road पे चला रहे हैं, but both of them have decided to choose how much risk they want to take and how much risk they do not want to take. Correct?
Yes, sir.
So इसी तरीके से इन्वेस्टमेंट्स पे भी ऐसे ही होता है. So when you start investing, आप बोलोगे नहीं, मुझे 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 इतने रिटर्न में खुश हो, मुझे अपना पैसा लॉस नहीं करना है. So you're running a very low risk appetite. Where somebody says कि हाँ भाई, I have crore of rupees and out of those, if a few lakh goes away, I have no issues, but I won't get higher return, and in that I'm happy to take an additional risk. Okay, that's where the risk appetite comes in. And for from a regulator perspective, to satisfy both these categories, they have created two types of segments. One is a mutual fund, where an investor who is running a low risk appetite and small value amount investment will go into these mutual funds. Somebody who's running a high risk appetite, उनको भी satisfy करने के लिए सब investment segment होना चाहिए ना, and for them it's a huge hedge fund. Now you pick and choose आपको कहाँ जाना है. Regulator ने दोनों options आपके लिए बना के रखे.
Okay, sir.
Guys, anything else before we close this up? So from my side, we're done with the hedge fund, we're done with venture capital, we're done with the angel investors, private equity firm, the setup of the structures of the private equity firms, limited partners, general partners, fund managers. कुछ पूछना है तो बताइए, otherwise I will wrap this section.
Is there any other difference between hedge funds and mutual funds other than the risky asset classes?
So we discussed, correct? See, the difference, it's not about the only risky asset classes. The difference is the risk appetite. The difference is the regulatory restrictions on them. Because mutual fund restrictions बहुत different रहती हैं, hedge fund बहुत different रहती है. And the third difference is the type of the investors, the type of customers they onboard. Mutual fund एक retail investor को 1000 रुपए के investment में भी onboard कर लेगा. Hedge fund generally few lakhs से नीचे बात ही नहीं करेंगे आपसे. ठीक है. The other difference is mutual fund का जो portfolio होता है वो ज्यादा ट्रांसपेरेंट होता है, इन्वेस्टर्स को पता होता है कहाँ पे ब्रॉड पता होता है कहाँ पे किस सेक्टर में कितना लगा है. सो दे आर मच डिस्क्लोजिंग मोर इन्फॉर्मेशन टू देयर इन्वेस्टर्स. बट हेज फंड बहुत वर्क्स लाइक अ ब्लैक बॉक्स. पैसा डाला, कहाँ लगा रहे हैं कहाँ नहीं लगा रहे इतना अच्छा से नहीं बताएंगे, इतना ट्रांसपेरेंसी में नहीं बताएंगे, बिकॉज दे आर ट्राइंग टू चर्न द मनी ऑन द स्ट्रैटेजी. अगर वो सबको ऐसे बता देंगे तो कोई भी दूसरा हेज फंड उसको कॉपी कर सकता है आसानी से. So broadly ये 4-5 differences होते हैं.
Okay.
ठीक है. So in case no further questions on
Sir,
I have one question on this hedge fund. One is, you're saying that this is less regulated and has a very high risk.
So when I say
involved.
less regulated, Deepak, what I meant,
As compared to mutual funds.
So
As compared to mutual funds.
So let me correct that articulation. What I meant, the regulator himself want hedge fund to play under less restrictions so that they can take a higher risk for the underlying investors who want that risk to be taken. तो अगर मैं बहुत सारे restriction लगा दूंगा, आप यहाँ इन्वेस्ट नहीं कर सकते, आप यहाँ नहीं कर सकते, इतना नहीं कर सकते, उतना नहीं कर सकते, तो वो रिस्क नहीं ले पाएंगे. That's what I meant.
Okay.
It's like this. मैं अगर so suppose मैंने हाँ, let's take this example. For example, the traffic cops, correct, which is again a regulator, kind of a regulator for our driving segment, correct. So वो स्पीड लिमिट डिफाइन करते हैं ऑन रोड्स कि ये इस रोड पे ये स्पीड है. बट जो रेसिंग ट्रैक्स होते हैं वहां पे वो स्पीड लिमिट नहीं होते हैं. सो लेट्स से इन अ नॉर्मल रोड द स्पीड लिमिट इज 50 किलोमीटर पर आवर. बट अगर आप एक रेसिंग ट्रैक बनाया हुआ है कहीं पे, तो वो रेसिंग ट्रैक पे 50 किलोमीटर पर आवर नहीं होगी ना, बिकॉज वो पता है उनको ट्रैफिक कॉप्स को कि वहां वो लोग आ रहे हैं जो लोग चाहते हैं एक हाई स्पीड पे चलाना, करेक्ट. वहां 50 किलोमीटर आवर को रिस्ट्रिक्शन को हटा के प्रॉब्ली हो सकता है 200 किलोमीटर पर आवर की रिस्ट्रिक्शन लगा रखी है. So that's what I meant when I say restriction दोनों ही जगह है, but वहां restriction अलग तरह की है to take care of the need of the racing track, और वो जो normal roads पर restriction है वो अलग तरह की to meet the requirement of the people who is walking or who is traveling on those roads. But the restriction दोनों ही जगह है, but वो restrictions risk appetite आता है वो बहुत different है. you don't understand, Deepak?
Yes. For the time being,
Yeah.
it's okay.
Somebody else was also asking something.
Sir, I was saying that just mutual fund में I want an example of hedge fund. Like mutual fund में large cap, mid cap, small cap ऐसे होते हैं, तो hedge fund का आप example दे दीजिए एक
नहीं,
category.
मिड कैप स्मॉल कैप ये एग्जांपल नहीं है म्यूचुअल फंड के,
मतलब
ये
type
म्यूचुअल
of
फंड के
mutual fund,
सेगमेंट्स है। हाँ,
type.
तो ऐसे ही हेज फंड में भी होता है, हेज फंड में मिड कैप स्मॉल कैप सब होता है, बट आपको इतना वो बताते नहीं कि हमने पैसा कहाँ लगा।
मतलब how to identify?
आइडेंटिफाई व्हाट?
Like if we want to invest like 5 lakh of rupees, how will we मतलब mutual fund में करना है या
नहीं
hedge
इन्वेस्ट कर
fund?
पाओगे हेज फंड, 5 लाख रुपीज में नहीं इन्वेस्ट कर पाओगे हेज फंड।
Okay.
So that's what I'm telling you, the ticket size for hedge funds are pretty big. 4-5 लाख 10 लाख में probably you might get some hedge fund, but उसके बाद वो कहाँ इन्वेस्ट कर रहा है कहाँ नहीं कर रहा है वो इतना ज्यादा डिस्क्लोजर नहीं देते आप लोग। But
Okay.
hedge fund will still work on the same strategy of mid cap, small cap, blue chip companies. They will have their portfolios from a risk appetite perspective. So वो वैसे ही similar होता है जैसे म्यूचुअल फंड का होता है।
Okay.
You mean to say that the information of this is not readily available in the market?
No, this information is not disclosed by the hedge fund to the extent the mutual fund discloses their information. दोनों में disclosure of the information में थोड़ा सा difference होता है। म्यूचुअल फंड थोड़ी ज्यादा इंफॉर्मेशन बताता है, हेज फंड थोड़ी कम इंफॉर्मेशन बताता है। म्यूचुअल फंड वो इंफॉर्मेशन बहुत पब्लिकली बताता है, हेज फंड वो इंफॉर्मेशन बहुत सेलेक्टिवली बताता है। क्योंकि हेज फंड ऐसी बहुत सारी स्ट्रैटेजीज लगाता है जो उसकी सेल्फ क्रिएटेड स्ट्रैटेजीज होती है इन्वेस्टमेंट करने और रिटर्न कमाने के लिए। तो अगर ऐसे बहुत आसानी से सबको बताना शुरू कर देगा तो कुछ दूसरे लोग उस स्ट्रैटेजी को रेप्लिकेट कर सकते हैं। हाँ जी, any other question guys?
Sir, in case of return for an investor, which is more profitable, like between hedge fund, PE fund, and mutual fund?
It depends on risk ना।
Okay.
अगर आप हाई रिस्क लेने के लिए रेडी हो तो हाई रिस्क विल गिव यू हाई रिटर्न आल्सो। Okay, so in case no questions, so uh, you discuss about special situation, correct? I told you the special situation. So the discuss what is special situation. Special situation, any of those categories which is not mentioned into that previous slide falls in the special. One example of the special situation is distressed assets or distressed investments. Now, what does this mean? If a company is not doing good, was in the problem or on the verge of a bankruptcy, or has a lot of dues outstanding, a lot of creditors payment outstanding, and then somebody steps in and start giving fund to take them out of that distress situation is again another example of a special situation. Okay, so this is not very different from what we've discussed. This is just an example of one of those special situations. Now, we've discussed secondary investments, correct? We've discussed what is primary and secondary investment. Similarly, it works into the private equity space as well. So, for example, replacement capital is a secondary investment. So, company A issues shares directly to the, let's assume, so suppose this is company A. Company A has issued shares to company X, so to private investor X. So this PE investment is a primary investor. What is primary? Where the company is directly issuing shares to the investor. Now, X after some time is able to sell these shares to Y, which is and Y steps in. And what we discussed, this is a replacement capital. Now, this is called a secondary investment. Why is it secondary investment? Because this is not primary investment, is where the company is issuing the shares, and in this case the company is not issuing the shares, one investor is selling off the shares to the other investor. Clear है? So ये same चीज़ जो हमने secondary market discuss करी थी, we are not calling this a secondary market, as I told you yesterday, because there is no market, there is no trading platform available. You need to find out an investor for yourself. There's no readily market available. That's why we don't call it as a secondary market. We call it as a secondary investment. If you're able to find a buyer for you, then it's good for you. Some of the examples or names of the private equity firm in case you want to look at it. Sorry, have we discussed mezzanine investments, mezzanine funding earlier?
No.
No, sir.
Okay. क्या होता है mezzanine investments? हाँ जी, क्या होता है mezzanine investments? Anybody any idea? Mezzanine funds, mezzanine capital? हाँ जी, nobody has heard about this. So mezzanine funding or mezzanine investments are these are kind of a combination of debt and equity, which means if you have so what do you mean mezzanine? Let me first explain that as a meaning of the word mezzanine, nothing to do with the finance. So mezzanine, let me so for example mezzanine floors होते हैं. Mezzanine floor क्या होता है? So suppose you have level 1 and you have level 2, okay, for a particular building. So इन दोनों के बीच में जो एक फ्लोर क्रिएट कर दिया जाता है उसको मेज़नाइन फ्लोर बोला जाता है. So it's not first floor, it's not a second floor. Between these two, when you create something, that's called as mezzanine floor. So similarly, mezzanine investment क्या होता है? Those are like investment होते हैं, debt and equity. When you try and create something in between, that's called as mezzanine investments. Now, the easier example or to structure to understand this is I've issued debt, and these debt will get converted into equity after some time. So those kind of investments are called as mezzanine funding or mezzanine investments, because they will get subordinated to the equity, which means after some time this will get converted into equity. So इस तरह के जो investments होते हैं उनको mezzanine investments बोला जाता है, because those are not pure equity and those are not pure debt. They are lying somewhere between debt and equity, especially during the transition phase जब वो conversion हो रहा होता है. So it's lying in between. That's why these are called as mezzanine investments. And that's why this says debt instruments which are subordinated to the equity. Okay, so I think this completes. हाँ ये आप देख लीजिए. Just to summarize this. We discussed this. Just as for your reading, just go through this in case any of the point you did not understand. There's a difference between private equity and IPO. Let me know in case any point that you don't understand. We've discussed this at length. I'm just giving you 2 minutes to go through this and let me know in case any doubt. क्लियर है ये? इसमें कुछ पूछ लो. Like last time, any points on this slide?
So currency for acquisition means?
So currency for acquisition is आपको INR funds चाहिए, आपको dollar funds चाहिए. So that means currency for acquisition. So IPO में, so for example जैसे Reliance है, Reliance IPO इंडिया में लेके आ पाएगा, so currency choose नहीं कर सकता. ठीक है. Private equity में generally क्या होता है? If I'm taking an investor from US, I'm taking investor from India. So I will get different currency. So from a US investor, I will get dollars. From an Indian investor, I will get
Okay.
INR. But for an IPO, you will always get your currency of the country where you're listed.
Okay.
So Reliance को dollar raise करने के लिए उसको any of the US stock exchange list होना पड़ेगा, तब वो dollars raise कर सकता है. Or he has to go through DR mode, which is deposit receipt. वो आगे आएगा, but उसके अलावा कोई तरीका नहीं है उनके लिए डॉलर रेज करने का in equity space.
Okay.
और प्राइवेट इक्विटी में मैं एक यूएस इन्वेस्टर को कन्विंस कर लेता हूँ, तो मुझे जो फंडिंग मिलेगी वो डॉलर में मिलेगी.
And if the case is for buyouts,
How does it make a difference? From a currency perspective, your question is still on the currency, correct?
no, from means, this is you're saying currency of acquisition. I'm saying that if somebody wants to go means, leverage buyout prospect, still they have to go for this listing in that country.
You're saying Indian entity wants to go for LBO in let's say US. Is that
Other
what
way
you're
around.
asking?
Other way around.
A US country
Vice
wants,
versa.
a US entity wants to acquire an Indian entity through LBO. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and the other way around also.
No. So in LBO, mein listing criteria is not required unless the law of the country requires that to happen. LBO is nothing to do with the listing requirement. ठीक है. In case no questions on this, so now how do we manage these private equity transactions? So let's assume I'm working in with an IB, or I'm working with PE team of an IB business, and if any client comes to us, comes to me, okay, from a private equity investment perspective, okay, so how would this transaction get through? So this slide is trying to explain you different phases through which this transaction goes through. So first I will have a preliminary discussion. Okay, so this is to understand what is your nature of the business, what is the idea. Okay, आप एक idea लेके आए हो, एक business लेके आए हो, and you want me to invest into your business, case one, or you want me to go and convince somebody else on your behalf. दोनों तरह के transactions हम लोग करते हैं. ठीक है. So, but before I do either of these, I need to understand what's the proposal, correct? What's your business idea? What's the potential on this? And then once I understand that, then what are the growth? ठीक है. Because ये important है, correct? Unless I understand the growth. Now, if you want me to go and represent you as my client to other investors, then I will also start identifying what are the suitable investors. आपको किस तरह के investors चाहिए अपनी companies में? Any doubt on slide 1, oh sorry, point 1 and 2? Okay. So once these two parts have been done, then we generally start preparing a detailed information where we highlight what are the positives and risk associated with this, and then we start pitching to the investors. We identified investors हैं, इनके साथ discussion start करते हैं. इसको pitching बोलते हैं और pitch book भी बोलते हैं. And this is this. If they show positive interest, you start discussing and evaluating terms and conditions. If they still show those positive interest, the negotiation happens, the due diligence happens, and they finally agree to buy or to invest stake into the companies. And this is where you start drafting the investment agreement. So investment agreement is nothing but a legal agreement where both the parties will sign to invest and to sell the shares of the company. And finally, then you close the contract. The legal documentations are being done, and after that, the money is being given to the company, and the shares are being issued to the investor. This is the way the transaction goes through. Our role as a analyst is primarily on these first 4 parts, because this from 4th to 5th, generally primarily our legal team takes care of this requirement, because from 4th to 5th, when you're moving from 4th point to 5th point, there's nothing left for a financial analyst perspective. The only piece is left is a legal documentation, and that's where the legal team gets involved and the lawyer gets involved to start executing the legal documentation to ensure this transaction is validated from a law perspective as well. Okay. So don't look at these timelines which is mentioned at the end of the slide, because we've seen some transaction that has taken more than 3.5 months for us to close it. We've seen some transaction where it has taken close to 2.5 years for us to close those transactions. We've seen some transactions that we've closed in less than a month as well. So it's not right representation of the practical timeline that we follow in the industry. So ignore this timeline. ठीक है? हाँ, कुछ पूछना है तो बताइए.
Yes, I have one question that because you are saying that analysis of client. After that, we'll go to client and for the analysis part. What are the stipulate? There are means stipulated areas where the analysis has to be done because we don't know that what client will ask that whether you have analyzed this part of also or not.
Which client are we referring to?
Because the way where you will go to have an present the case that this is the investment.
Investors, correct?
Basically.
Investors. Because मेरा client, so suppose Deepak, you come to me with an idea and say, Nishant, can you help me in getting funds? So you are my client. And now if I approach, let's assume Kritika, so Kritika is not my client, Kritika becomes an investor.
Investor, basically, yeah, okay.
जो मैं चार्ज करूंगा, जो मैं अपना पैसा कमाऊंगा या रेवेन्यू फीस चार्ज करूंगा, वो
that is from client. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah. ठीक है. So now your question is कि मैं investor को क्या parameters पे explain करूंगा? Is that the question?
Yes, yes. Or means there is a defined areas of analysis that will go in the market or will go with.
There is no defined criteria, but there are based on our experience.
Or will go with that EIC approach.
EIC तो है ही, but I'm saying there is no list that the regulator or somebody is defined कि ये points पे explain करना है. But based on the transaction that I've seen and 95% of the points remain same in most of the transaction because अगर मैं कृतिका को जाके ये pitch कर रहा हूँ, so she would be interested in what? Let's understand that. First, will she be interested in understanding what the business is all about? हाँ या ना?
Yes, yes.
Deepak? So that's the first point. I will cover everything about what is this business, especially अगर ये completely new business idea है, so then she would need more information to absorb this idea. अगर कोई नई टेक्नोलॉजी, वो टेक्नोलॉजी के बारे में बताना पड़ेगा. कोई नई कंट्री में हम कुछ लॉन्च करने की बात कर रहे हैं, उस कंट्री का मुझे डेमोग्राफिक्स कवर करना पड़ेगा. So I have to give entire information to her or to the investor to get convinced and understand what the business idea is all about. हाँ या ना? You with me till this point?
Yes, yes. My question to come up to cover this aspect is that whether that analyst has that acumen to go, for example, in this, I'm looking for a steel industry, to that mindset, that knowledge, and that are we looking for that aspect also from an analyst?
Of course, yes. So suppose if Deepak, you are somebody who's trying to do something into steel industry. आपको business idea लेके आते हो in the steel industry. Unless I have an understanding of the steel industry, would I be able to understand your idea and would I be able to pitch to somebody else? My role is not to act like a postman. Okay, कि आपने क्या बोला, मैंने कृतिका को forward कर दिया, कृतिका ने जो बोला वो आपको forward कर दिया. So because when you will go and make that pitch to Kritika or to invest in this as example, if I don't understand steel industry and you're coming from steel industry, it could be technology also. For example, you're coming out and pitching some idea into e-commerce segment. Unless I understand the dynamics of the e-commerce, I understand the growth potential of the e-commerce, I understand the challenges, I don't understand the issues. तो मैं कैसे एनालिसिस कर पाऊंगा, मैं वैल्यूएशन कैसे कर पाऊंगा, मैं ग्रोथ ड्राइवर्स कैसे आइडेंटिफाई कर पाऊंगा? कि वो सब आपको नहीं आता होगा. आप तो सिर्फ एक बिजनेस आइडिया, बिजनेस मॉडल लेके मेरे पास आ जाओगे and you expect me to start guiding you and start giving you that support. So yes, to answer your question, yes, the analyst is expected to know those things. Of course, I might not be 100% SME on your business idea. You are SME on your business idea. But if you're coming into a particular sector, we will assign our sector specialist to work on the transaction. And before we assign or create a team, a deal team create करी जाती है. We'll talk about this later when we reach to that stage. So when we create a deal team for a particular transaction, while selecting the resources from the bench, we ensure कि ये जिस sector से आ रहा है, जिस industry की deal हमें करनी है, we get SMEs of all those sectors or those geographies to provide the relevant support or analysis or advice to the client. अदरवाइज तो फिर वो क्लाइंट के लिए यूजफुल नहीं रहेगा, और तभी तो क्लाइंट आपको पैसा देता है ना, क्योंकि आप वो एक्सपर्टीज उसके साथ शेयर कर पाते हो.
Got it. Because the whole of analysis has a team associated with
Yes. कभी कभी ऐसा भी हुआ है
respective
कि मैंने
SMEs.
yes, and I've seen couple of transactions also where the client has come to us and we say we're not ready for the from expertise perspective. So sometimes we reject the transaction saying that we don't have ability or expertise into that business, because you don't want to spoil the relationship with the client कि आप client का business करने के लिए ले लो, and then later you realize, or the client himself realize कि आपको expertise नहीं. So we have there, it is very common that you reject certain transactions and you tell the client we don't have expertise in this. In certain cases, we have also seen that we tell the client we don't have expertise right now, but we can build the expertise in next couple of months. Either it could be by hiring somebody from the market, either could be by bringing some consultant on the board, whatever the combination that's being agreed, and then you go ahead with the transaction. So all permutation combinations are possible. Anybody else, any other doubt on this slide, guys? This is important. मैं प्राइवेट इक्विटी बहुत डेप्थ में करा रहा हूँ बिकॉज लॉट ऑफ पीसेस जो आपने कभी देखे नहीं होंगे या बाहर जनरली आसानी से नहीं पढ़े होंगे, इज व्हाट वी आर ट्राइंग टू गेट इनसाइट ऑफ हाउ दिस ट्रांजैक्शन हैपन इन फ्रॉम इंडस्ट्री पर्सपेक्टिव. ओके, इन केस नो, सो रिमेनिंग स्लाइड्स में वो जो मैंने आपको समझाया वही एक्सप्लेन किया हुआ. यू कैन गो थ्रू दिस इन केस नो in much more depth. This is also we broadly discussed, but still. So again, private equity जो investments करते हैं, they might have two school of thought. One is they do not want to seek control, which means they do not want to become a controlling stake into the organization. ठीक है, जनरली ऐसे ही ट्रांजेक्शन होते हैं, बिकॉज जनरली जो प्रमोटर्स हम लोग जिनसे डील करते हैं, जो आइडिया लेके आता है, वो अपना कंट्रोलिंग स्टेक आपको देना पसंद नहीं करेगा. ही कैन गो अप टू 49%, बट जनरली वो उससे ज्यादा देना पसंद नहीं करते हैं. ठीक है, सो जनरली these private equity investors are not too rigid about this control, but they're more interested about this growth story. So if the business has a lot of growth potential, they generally will tend to invest even if they're not getting a controlling stake in the organization. So that's what this slide is trying to explain to you. They're more interested about the operational part of the management, whether it's a professionally managed organization, whether it's a transparent organization or not, whether even if they're not having 51% stake, will the person who will be having 51% stake understand how to run the business? Is he capable enough to run the company in a professional way? Will he be able to disclose a lot of information which is required to the other investors or not, and stuff like this. So this is generally the background of the school of thought where most of the private equity investors play. I'm not again trying to say we've not seen the transactions where the private equity has put a foot down and say nahi mujhe majority stake चाहिए. Yes, we've seen those transactions as well where some of the private equity firms have gone for controlling stake as well, but बहुत rare होती है वैसे. Generally इसी तरह का pattern आपको दिखता है कि they're not very fussed about the controlling stake. They're more serious or more fuss about the growth story of the company. I think rest anyways is we've discussed. So in this now अगर ये एक बिजनेस साइकिल ले लेते हैं कंपनी का, सो ये थोड़ा ठीक से नहीं बना हुआ, बट लेट्स पुट दिस, यानी द बिजनेस साइकिल कंपनी का ऐसे जाता है. ठीक है, So generally प्राइवेट इक्विटी जो इन्वेस्टमेंट करना पसंद करता है, जनरली दे ट्राई एंड प्रेफर टू स्टेप हियर where the company has started showing a growth potential, and they generally try and exit somewhere here. This is generally what, because यहाँ पे कंपनी का प्राइस या वैल्यू सबसे पीक पे पहुंच चुका होता है, and this is the right time for them to exit before it starts showing downtrend. ठीक है, so this is where they try and enter, and this is where they try and exit. Again, having said this, this is not a rule. I have seen a lot of transactions where they have entered at this stage as well. So, but most of the time they will try and prefer to enter at this stage because यहाँ पे risk बहुत कम हो चुका है of the success, because कंपनी ने अपना ग्रोथ पोटेंशियल स्टार्ट कर दिया है, बट अभी बाकी ग्रोथ पोटेंशियल बाकी है. ठीक है, सो रिस्क ऑफ प्रोडक्ट बिंग और आइडिया बिंग एक्सेप्टेड बाय द मार्केट और नॉट, वो रिस्क निकल गया है. अब कंपनी को सिर्फ कुछ फंडिंग की जरूरत है जिससे वो और ज्यादा स्पीड पे भाग सके. करेक्ट. देख लीजिए, ये भी हमने डिस्कस कर लिया. जनरली लिक्विड स्टॉक. ठीक है, they generally prefer the equity instruments. They try and give mentoring process. They will involve, they will keep you guidance देंगे, mentor करेंगे आपको. They typically look for long term investment. Risk high होते हैं, वो हमने discuss कर लिया. And they will add value to the company by active participation. They're not somebody like a venture capital के पैसा दे दिया और चुपचाप बैठे हुए, कुछ bother नहीं है. They will continuously will give you guidance. They will bring their contacts. They will bring their expertise. कोई और अगर कंपनी है उनकी और उसमें कुछ कॉन्टैक्ट्स हैं या उसका कोई बिजनेस से आपको फायदा हो सकता है, उसको हेल्प करेंगे. They will give full support, and they will be continuously they will be actively participating in giving those ideas and support. कुछ पूछना है यहाँ तक? ठीक है. So in case no, we'll keep till this point. This slide number 77. We'll start from 78 onwards in the next class. Any doubt before we wrap this up? We're done with the private equity space. Till 77. Any questions or before we close? No? Okay. Okay. So thanks. We'll continue next week. Next weekend. Thanks. Bye.